Hello everyone. Today we will be studying and knowing about second point from our chapter, that is feedback amplifiers. So the name of the point and the points that we are going to study today in this lecture, types of feedbacks. So we will be studying about different types of feedbacks that is present into our amplifier circuits. Okay, and before knowing what are the types of feedbacks, we will understand first of all what is the process of feedbacks, what is the technique of feedback. Okay, the process of feedback is nothing but injecting some part or some energy of the output back into the input. So this is known as feedback. Like it is going to take certain part from the output, means a fraction or certain part of that particular output is taken by the feedback circuit and is provided as input again to that amplifier circuit. This technique is known as feedback technique. Okay, then why is it useful, why the feedback is required? First of all, the feedback is necessary because whenever the amplification is done into the amplifier circuit for a particular signal, like any of the signal is amplified using the amplifier circuit, that time what will happen is there is a noise introduced into it, there are few distortions, few disturbances included into it. So these distortions can be cleared with the help of this feedback technique. Okay, so the two types of feedbacks that we are going to study today in this lecture is positive feedback and the second one is negative feedback. So let's move towards knowing these feedbacks one by one. So let's study what is the difference between these two feedbacks, positive and the negative one. So let's have a comparison through the diagrams. We'll have a closure to it. So the first one is positive feedback shown here. The second one is negative feedback. Here you can see that the triangular part that is present, the triangle that is made, it indicates amplifier. Then there is a beta block, that is nothing but our feedback circuit, as we have seen into our previous lecture. Now here you can see to the amplifier there are two terminals, one is positive and one is negative. Now here the difference you can see is in the positive feedback you will see that input is given to the negative terminal. So it is called as a positive feedback because feedback is obtained from the positive side, right? On this triangular part of amplifier circuit, you can see that there is negative sign on the top and the positive sign downsides. Then here you will see the difference that input is given to the negative part. So it is called as a positive feedback because the feedback is positive. Now if you go on the right hand side diagram, you will see that there is a positive part that is upside and negative part is downside. Here you can see the reverse mechanism, that input part is given to the positive side whereas the feedback is negative over here. So this is known as negative feedback. So here you can understand the difference between these two feedbacks. Shall move towards the next part. Okay. So now we'll start with the first feedback that we are going to study, that is positive feedback. So the definition for the positive feedback is that either the voltage or the current, okay, the feedback energy which we are having, it's either voltage or current is going to be in phase with the input signal. Okay, it is not going to be out of phase, it will be in phase with the input signal. So it is called as positive feedback again, because here there are two types of signals, right? Input signal is there that we give to the amplifier. Secondly, there is a feedback signal that we get from the feedback circuit. Now these two signals, input signal and the feedback signal, should be in phase to each other, means both of these creates 180-degree phase shift. Means in the second bullet point you can see the input signal is also going to create a phase shift of 180 degree, whereas feedback signal also makes a phase shift of 180 degree. So 180 plus 180 makes a 360-degree resultant phase shift. So it is again finally in phase with the input signal. So that is the reason it is called as the positive feedback. Shall tell again, why is it called as a positive feedback? Because uh, the voltage or the current is in phase with the input signal. Okay, that you need to remember that either the voltage or the current is always in phase with the input signal. Means both this input signal and feedback signal are going to create the phase shift of 180 degree. So 180 degree of input signal plus 180 degree of feedback signal together makes a 360 degree phase shift. Okay, so that is why it is again in phase with the input signal, so we call it as a positive feedback. So we need to see what are the disadvantages we face into positive feedback. Now what are the disadvantages that we see into positive feedbacks? That is, here we have mentioned two disadvantages. Okay, that is increasing distortion and instability. Okay, but again the advantage is also there, that it increases the gain of the amplifier, but it has disadvantages also, that is it increases distortion and instability in the signals. Now what is distortion, we must know before that. Distortion means whatever the output wave we are going to obtain, or output waveform or signal we are going to get, will be having some disturbances, unwanted fluctuations present into it as compared to the input signal given. Means there are going to be few variations, means output will not be identical to the input here. Okay, this is nothing but distortion. So the distortions and disturbances are more into the positive feedback. So the meaning of distortion is the output is not same as the input is given. uh, Comparatively, there are few more disturbances in the output signal. So this is one of the disadvantage of positive feedback. Again, the instability is also one of the disadvantages of positive feedback. So these are the two disadvantages, prime disadvantages we face into positive feedback. That is the reason the positive feedback is most of the times not recommended for the amplifiers. So in this case, we have another one feedback, that is negative feedback. Okay, so the drawbacks that are present, or the disadvantages that we are having into positive feedbacks, are covered into the negative feedbacks. So shall move towards the negative feedbacks also. Okay. So we must know what is negative feedback and what is its definition, or how the negative feedback is described. Now as we seen for the positive, it is exactly opposite to the positive feedback. Here what will happen is the voltage or current, okay, of that feedback circuit are going to be completely opposite and completely out of phase with the input signal over here. Means with the input, the feedback energies, voltage and current both are going to stay out of phase, completely opposite. So we call it as a negative feedback. Okay, now in negative feedback what will happen is the amplifier is going to create the phase shift of 180 degree. Okay, but the feedback network is not going to create any phase, it will be having a zero phase shift over here. When we went to positive feedback, when we go towards positive feedback, there both input signal, both the amplifier circuit and both feedback circuit used to give the phase shift of 180 degree plus 180 degree. So it used to be in phase with the input, so we called it as a positive feedback. Now here in the negative feedback, when we come, we realize that amplifiers only 180 degree created phase shift is present, but the feedback network over here is going to give us a zero phase shift. Means that is the reason they are not in phase with each other, they are out of phase. Okay, so this is known as negative feedback. So again, we'll study what are the advantages that we have covered up into negative feedback as compared to the positive feedback. Okay, so let's see what are the advantages and disadvantages that are present into the negative feedback as compared to the positive feedback. So here, when we studied about positive feedback, we realized that the gain of the positive feedback is much more and it is improvised, okay, as compared to the negative one, because in the negative feedback we are going to get the gain of the amplifier in a reduced amount. So as the advantages are more in the negative feedback, it is most of the times recommended. The only drawback into the negative feedback is that its gain is reduced, but it is exactly opposite to the positive one. In the positive feedback we used to get the more gain, but here in the negative feedback we are going to get reduced gain. But never mind, we are going to have too many advantages also into it. Starting from number one, the first advantage of using the negative feedback is that the stability of the gain is improved. Means whatever the gain we are going to achieve during this amplification process while using the negative feedback will be more as compared to the positive feedback. Okay, so we'll get a stable gain throughout our amplification process. The second one is a reduction in the distortion. Now, what is distortion? I have already told while we were studying about positive feedback. Since we have studied, still in short, we'll tell you what is distortion. Distortion is nothing but the output or the changes we get into our output signal as compared to the input signal. Is whatever input we have applied, but we find few variations into our output signal. This thing is known as distortion. Means we are not getting a good identical replica of the input signal in our output signal. Okay. Then the third one is reduction in the noise. Now, whatever the noise that has been introduced during the process of amplification is much more reduced into the negative feedback as compared to the positive feedback. Then the fourth point or the fourth advantage of negative feedback is that it increases the input impedance and decreases the output impedance. The fifth one is it decreases the output impedance. Now we must know what is the impedance or what is input impedance first of all. So input impedance is that it is basically a ratio of current. So the input impedance, it is the ratio of voltage to current that is flowing in the terminals. Okay, inside the terminals, that is known as input impedance, and that input impedance is reduced here. Then what is the output impedance? Output impedance again is a ratio of uh, voltage to current that is flowing out the terminals. Okay, so it is known as output impedance. So here in this case of negative feedback, input impedance is increased, which is beneficial for the amplification process where there is a decrease in the output impedance. Then it is having a increase in the range of uniform application. Is throughout the application is uniform and it is stable throughout. Okay, so there are no many fluctuations taking place into it. So it is because of these many advantages that are present into the negative feedbacks, it is frequently used into the amplifiers as compared to the positive feedbacks. As we have today seen what are the differences between these two feedbacks, we have seen about the different representations through the diagrams of these two feedbacks. We also came to a conclusion that positive feedback is not that recommended into our amplifier circuits, but the negative feedback is most likely to be employed in the amplifiers. So today we have seen uh, what is the difference between these two feedback and feedbacks, these types of these feedbacks like positive and negative. We compared its advantages and disadvantages, and also we came to few conclusions into it. In this way, we have covered over this point. Okay, thank you.